Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. We have a great show lined up for you today. You know, management was hard enough pre-pandemic, and now the difficulty in getting things done has dramatically increased. In face-to-face interactions, humans have thousands of indicators to tell them what the other party is thinking and how they are reacting. Resorting to purely digital communication obliterates these clues, stopping us from reading the subtle body language that we've evolved to use in all interactions to become better leaders, kinder managers, and more effective cogs in the corporate machine. Our guest today, McKenna Sweazey, is the author of the new book, How to Win Friends and Manage Remotely. McKenna, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here, Chris. I'm so excited to talk about this with you.
Absolutely. I think we're all kind of in the same boat. I'm a business owner, and my team consists of me and my assistant, but my assistant is now in Friendswood, and I'm here in Houston, and that's about 50 to 100 miles away, and that's just the way we're doing it now. And so, we're all kind of pre-pandemic did things a little bit different. Post-pandemic, whether people have worked remotely in the past, we're definitely seeing more of it. So as leaders, this topic seems to be very timely. It really seemed like a good topic. Let's start with, why did you write the book, How to Win Friends and Manage Remotely?
So I had been managing a team, been being managed from across distances, from London to Tel Aviv to Hong Kong for years, and had been thinking about this topic of what I call digital empathy the whole time. How do you recognize and understand the feelings of the people you're working with using digital tools? Because obviously humans pick up thousands and thousands of nonverbal cues, from everything from obviously pace of speaking, which does work digitally, to hand gestures, which for those of you who can see this video, they're not quite as good on a screen. 50% of them are off the screen. Body language, etc. You're missing a lot when you're speaking to someone in a virtual office. So had been thinking about this idea for a while, and then the pandemic hit, and I thought, all of these ideas that I've been considering are going to be ever more important, which I thought maybe I'll write a book. And then I got to, for me, what was really a fun part, which was diving into all the research that had been done to think about how people can communicate over email, Slack. Well, there's not so much research and wasn't 2 years ago about Slack, but there probably is now. Email, Slack, document commenting, telephone, video conferencing, email, everything. And of course, the research tells us a lot of things that we know intuitively. We can pick up people's emotions from just an email, but it's never going to be as good as what you get from sitting next to someone. But there's so many benefits from remote and hybrid work. So how do we kind of mesh those two concepts together and get the emotional cues we need to work more effectively and more happily with our fellow human beings? And then also, make the tools work for us in that sense.
I love it. So this is such a great topic. I shared with you before we went live here a moment ago that, the way my practice is set up now, we're a team of two. One of us is a remote in Friendswood, and one of us is remote here in Houston. And so that is post-pandemic. But even as a public speaker, one of the things that we would go out and we would host host seminars, and those have now shifted to webinars. And so that is one thing I'm finding very difficult, the connection from, in front of a group to doing this online, doing it through a webinar. I know in the book you talk about things as leaders that we can do. You started out by saying managing yourself, and you talk about improving your own empathy. What does that mean? Tell us about that.
So empathy is both an innate skill, it's part of our monkey brain, being able to read someone's facial expressions, but it's also absolutely a learned skill. And that ability, and I think in the workplace, it's a lot about context and pattern recognition. So as a pre-pandemic example, if someone comes into the office and they spill a cup of coffee on themselves and you can hear them on the phone with their spouse being like, I don't want to go to your mom's for Thanksgiving. And then they come into the meeting and they're kind of abrupt with you. You think, well, there's a giant coffee stain. Their arms are crossed. I just heard them on the phone. I have so much more context. And I can then say, well, Joey, this has nothing to do with me. And then, of course, that same thing always happens on Zoom, too. We spill coffee, we argue about mothers-in-law, et cetera, et cetera. But you have no context. So I show up to this meeting and you don't have any information about why I'm now being abrupt. You just know that there's a difference. And for a lot of people, that difference can be perceived as being about them when it usually is actually about the speaker. But that being said, noticing those differences, and I think in organizations with a lot of psychological safety, the way to develop the pattern recognition is to ask, hey, you seem a little stressed. What's up? And hopefully you have an opportunity to do that so that you can build up a pattern for the differences you see that are visible digitally that may not be visible, may not be as visible as the in-person ones would have been. So you can now say, Joey is like that when he's mad about something else. So that is really helpful if you can ask. You can't always ask. Or what if you're, a salesperson and you're having a conversation with a supplier, and you might not have the opportunity to say, did you have a bad day today? You might. It depends on the kind of salesperson you are. But the more practice you have, understanding the people you do know and what triggers they might have and how you should react, the better you can frame everyone's behavior. My number one, so my personal bugbear in life, and I think this is true for a lot of knowledge workers, there's a lot of document commenting. So I write a memo, I write a PowerPoint, and you go in and you comment on it. And sometimes it's passive aggressive. Sometimes people are like, why didn't you bring up the sales figures? And you're like, well, that's on the next slide. If you just read ahead, you would know I'm going to bring them up. I'm very empathetic. And so I always feel much more emotional about these things than maybe everyone else does. But that being said, that's why I'm here to lead the way on. You should always hold your comments until you've read the whole thing, because they are going to bring up those sales numbers. But as the recipient of what may or may not be passive aggressive comments, then it's best to take it with a grain of salt and to always assume it's not about you. It's about them. They mean it in the best possible way. So going into it with everyone with the idea that I am trying to help us all get to the best possible outcome, that assumption is a useful way of framing empathy and framing what are my colleagues thinking on the other side.
I love it. I love it. You talked about, if you're not sure, ask. That's one of the things we have to do in this new world, right?
Yeah.
And then we may not have the opportunity for some of these kind of impromptu meetings that we're having, but for the people that we do know, understanding the people that we already know, kind of getting an idea of reading them, and then holding, off on some of those comments until you've read the whole email. Don't, passive aggressively put those little arrows in there. That is all really, really good stuff. And just learning how to communicate and the empathy piece of it. I know one of the things are people are located physically in their house. Like I'm in my office here, but my wife works from home. My assistant's working from her home. One of the things you write about is just feeling good when working from your home. Tell us about that.
So, obviously flexible work has a lot of upside, and you can, go pick up your kids from school or work out during the middle of the day. And those are all benefits. But going to the office also has a lot of benefits. The cognitive scaffolding of understanding I am in the workplace, this is where I do work, is very helpful. And if you live in the suburbs and you have, some space, you can develop a real home office. If you live, say, in Manhattan, you might be working from your kitchen table. And so finding ways to visually say this is the workspace, or even, humans, I wouldn't do this, but I know there are people who burn a candle because smell is is potentially our most powerful sense. And to tell yourself that I am in the workplace smell, this is not me, but people do it. Different kinds of lighting, music, whether or not you need your headphones on that are noise canceling, or you need to listen to a certain type of music. You need to build a space, even if you don't have a physical space. So that's point one, your physical space. And two is the routine. Commuting, which can be horrible, can also be really wonderful. It's absolutely a way to turn on, turn off, to categorize the day on the way home and think, what kind of day was that? What do I think is the most important thing I need to do tomorrow? For many people, you don't actually have your laptop open. You might have your phone. And so you can do some things, but you can't, grind. And that is a really useful way to not bifurcate, to bookend the day. And that can be hard if you're at home. But so you can fake that, going for a walk, doing something that tells you it's the end of the day. Maybe it's journaling, maybe it's writing down tomorrow's to-do list, being able to separate those moments. I think is hugely important for all of us working from home.
I love that. I hadn't heard the candle one, but the smells and the sounds and the different things that you could do as kind of place markers to let you know, hey, hey, get out of your pajamas.
Yeah.
We're at
I
work,
didn't even
right?
mention that. I feel like that's early pandemic chat. Get out of your pajamas, people.
Hopefully we're past that part, and now people are, well, you don't know.
No judgment.
Exactly. Well, but there you go. I mean, these are all really good ideas of kind of getting your brain into that. I know we use like the noise canceling headphones. So even if there happens to be like a kid, we've got, kiddos, if they're in the background,
Yeah.
TV's on, that really helps limit, if client calls in, they don't necessarily know the TV's on in the background.
Yeah.
So those are really, really good things there. What about just basic communication? You talk about speaking so others will understand. What does that mean?
So it means a couple of things. One is tailoring your ability to be understood, and hand gestures is a really good example. If you are a hand gesture person, and that is part of the way that for your entire life, let's say you're 40, you've spent 35 years being a hand gesture person, and now you are not a hand gesture person anymore. So that, understanding what are your sort of peculiarities is not as a nice word, but I can't find the synonym right now. The ways that you are different that you need to communicate, and understanding how you're going to have to reframe them. Softening text-only language. Text-only language obviously can convey emotions. Surely anyone who's read Jane Austen understands that you can fall in love based purely on a letter relationship. And we can take advantage of that. But we can also use other tools. So obviously video conference, emoji, they get a bad rap, but they are actually, a smiley face does convey that you mean this in good humor, and that can be really helpful. I know that there are generational differences about that. I sort of refuse to believe that if you can't take a smiley face as like a non-sarcastic, I just mean this in good humor, you have to go work on yourself about that. And Slack has become a big part of a lot of office places, and it's really a medium that lends itself to GIFs, to emojis, to sharing of things, and finding ways to bring your humor, your humanity to your communication style. And also it can be on like a very practical level, it can be not as clear you're speaking. If you're a fast speaker, I'm a very fast speaker. You have to work a little harder, again, because you're missing some body language tools to round out what you're saying. If you have a heavy accent, that can be harder when you're not able to read lips in real time, because obviously the bandwidth of video isn't as fast. So all of these things to make sure that your speaking tools are like at their best. There's a tendency, it happens to affect women more than men, about upspeak and sort of ending on a question. And anything like that, when you're reducing the number of ways that I can understand you, any of those types of differences are going to be magnified and are going to make you sound maybe less intelligent. Upspeak tends to make people sound less intelligent. Speaking quickly means your message might get lost. So understanding how you can either change those things, or if you speak quickly, follow up with the notes. Make sure that everyone gets it from another piece of communication.
I love it. I love it. Upspeak the anchor man where Ron Burgundy's like, I'm Ron Burgundy with the question marks. I always remind my wife when we're telling my son to do something, always end it on a period, not a question mark, or else they will remember that.
Yes.
Well, so I'm going to ask you this. I don't know other listeners might. I'm kind of dating myself. I'm 48, but Slack. What is Slack? I'm not even familiar with Slack.
Not a
I
Slack
prob
user. And
yeah, probably should be. Tell me about this.
well, Slack was intended as a tool, I believe, to remove email. That email has some serious inefficiencies. And so you can, within an organization, have different private channels, one-on-one chats. And a lot of corporates use it to share information, or not even corporates, a lot of companies. But it is a news feed, right? It is like much like using a text message chain or WhatsApp. The information is flowing downwards as opposed to an
like
inbox.
an instant message, but like shorter, concise.
Well, you can put any length you want, which I have seen.
Okay.
And if you're using effectively a news feed, it's like if you're using all text messages to communicate with your entire company, they start to stack up. And even if there's a search functionality, and even if there's an ability to pin information, things get lost. And this is why I think, for me, I advise people not to use text messaging or WhatsApp for important communications because of that chain environment, because it's hard to get to the previous information. It's just really not designed to save information in the way that email is. We're sort of used to this mark on red, hold on to that one piece of information. The other thing is that news feeds, for anyone following the news, for social media, news feeds can be overwhelming for people for their mental health. It's a lot of information flying at you that you can't really, there are ways to turn it off. There's absolutely ways to optimize the platform or any newsfeed platform. But if it's a part of your working environment, you kind of do have to have it open, and then there's notifications and you're getting pinged, and you start to feed off the energy, which can be good or bad. It's only how it affects you. But so for any tool, and I think this is kind of like the document commenting, thinking about the etiquette. We have, 150 years of office etiquette. How does one behave in an office? And we have 2 years of how does one behave in a virtual office? What's appropriate?
In a virtual
What does our team
space.
expect?
I love it. I love it. So these are all things, newer things that, there are teams that have worked internationally, or they've had people out in the field and they've kind of had to cross these. But for most companies, a lot of this stuff can be new territory.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to pivot into that, where we go into, as a leader managing virtual teams, how do you drive that real connection virtually?
So the cheap answer is to get everyone together in person. Okay. And I'll just say there's no substitute. So barring that, because that is not always possible, not always feasible, for a variety of reasons, it is about, and this term, which was really popularized by Google, this psychological safety. Does my team feel like they can fail? Do they feel like they can share? Do they feel like they can be open with the people they're working with? And there are a couple of known ways to develop that intimacy, whether that's, there's some usually guided by professional team building opportunities, like life mapping, where you're going through the 3 highest highs and the 3 lowest lows of your life. And that can be done on a video conference. You don't have to be in person. And you can really begin to share, because it's finding that way of sharing who you are. On a lighter note, I find that Myers-Briggs and color mapping and all those traditional personality tests, those give everyone a framework to talk about themselves in a very psychologist sort of way, without it feeling too touchy-feely, which for some people they might not want to share. But Myers-Briggs is a good entryway into who am I? What kind of person am I? And in a very accepted way to do that in the office. So any way that you can build and get people to reveal more in a way that feels appropriate for the office, so that you're building up that context, so that when Joey has come into the office, and he's come into the office, and by office I mean Zoom call, and he's in a bit of a mood, you feel a lot of shared humanity for Joey, and you feel like it isn't about you, because if it was about you, Joey would have told you. And that allows you to go into the conversation from a place of, all right, this is about him. Let's just get the work done. Maybe I'll follow up with him after. Maybe I don't need to. But this is not about me.
All of that makes a lot of sense. I remember old HR days of the Myers-Briggs and the personality stuff, but looking at it like, hey, this does even more important to understand. And we'll talk a little bit later about hiring and interviewing and stuff, but that kind of comes into my mind when you're meeting people. But still staying on the virtual team idea, one of the things that you talk about is distributing knowledge synchronously. I can't even say it, or synchronously. But I think generally the idea of, how do you get information out to people, and even communicating with people, or when do you send them too many emails? Are you sending them not enough? Tell us a little bit about that.
And I think this is really when you need to pick, in every organization, you need to pick your top 3 tools, and whether that's email, meeting notes, and meetings, just as 3 examples. And it could be Slack, and it could be video conferences, it could be anything. And say, what is the expected behavior in our business? How often? What do we use these for? Who ought to attend, and how often do they need to happen? And actually spelling it out as part of the culture playbook. What are we using these for? Because if you understand how you're sharing knowledge and getting things done, then you can share knowledge and get things done, which is very critical for corporate work in modern times. But being clear about, like an SLA for email. If we're working asynchronously and people are not working 9 to 5, what you think is an appropriate response time might be totally unreasonable for someone who says, well, I actually only work, 8 a.m. to noon, and then I work in the evenings for 4 hours. So figuring out what the rules are and how to be transparent about them, and then valuing that, and valuing, in the example I gave is meeting notes. In asynchronous work, not everyone can attend the meeting. So are you being really good about how is that information stored and what happens after the meeting? Because if there are no notes and there are no action items, then why did the meeting happen? And who needs to know about that? And finding the tools that allow you to share information in a way that is not overwhelming, like a company-wide email of every single meeting note, like that would be overwhelming. But me just sending one person the meeting notes, that's maybe not whelming enough. You don't have enough access to it. People who want to go back and search for it for institutional knowledge wouldn't have access. So figuring out how do we store these, how do we give access to pieces of information is hugely important, because that is what we're doing in our desks all day. We're flowing information back and forth across, broadband cables.
I think the idea that you just mentioned of, spelling it out and really defining some of those rules. We were lucky enough that when the pandemic happened, Zoom, GoToMeetings, these different platforms were so far along that we were able to kind of just go with it, right? There were some glitches at the beginning, but they corrected a lot of it. But we didn't really take the time to spell it out or define the rules. And now that we've had kind of a break and a pause, that tip that you gave us of really kind of putting some rules around it seems like, we need to pause and do that, and that will help. We are going to run out of time. We've only got a few minutes left, and there's so much information in here. I did want to ask you just a little bit about hiring. As a business owner, as a manager, as a leader, people who are in that role where they're interviewing remotely, in the next 3 minutes, what can you share with us about interviewing remotely that would be helpful?
I think when I first started thinking about this, I thought it was more of an issue, and now the job is remote and is going to be remote. So really, you have access to the important pieces of information that you're looking for. Are they good at communicating over Zoom? Do they speak in a way that you can understand? Are their emails clear? And I think that we will see and have seen more sort of work product output. Just, can I see a little example of how you would do a project, how you'd organize your thoughts? many people's jobs require more written work now because you need that documentation, because of that knowledge sharing. So let me see a little bit about that in advance, because I do need to understand how you're going to communicate. And that's primarily now the tool that we use to communicate is written word.
That is so strong. There's a lot of people who don't have the ability to sit down and write a well thought out letter that translates to email. And as the language gets shorter and shorter and more concise, it's like a lot of that gets lost along the way. So asking for that work product output like up front, an example of it, I think that is a great tip for listeners. Well, we are right here at the end of the show. The book, How to Win Friends and Manage Remotely, McKenna, Sweazey. What have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners?
I think we covered the most important parts. I think the big thing is saying to your team, we want to create a culture that works digitally. And so let's be thoughtful and pick out what things bug us, what things are great, what works, and tell everyone that that's how we're going to do it. And that's okay. It's a good thing.
I love it. I love it. McKenna, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good rest of the day there.
Absolutely.